On the Joy of Football podcast today, we're trying to bring fruit to barren lands. Why aren't English managers winning more trophies? Why are left-backs not playing consistently in the Premier League? Injuries and goodness knows what else. Martin's letter from the Gantry tries to deal with all the difficult names that you have to pronounce. And we're going back to the best time of our lives with 4 great European clubs. You can get involved by emailing the joys, plural, of football podcast at gmail.com, and you can also of course get involved on our Patreon, which is up and running now. Nick Parmenter, you are the first person to have placed your name on there, and you'll be getting some goodies soon. Thank you everybody for getting involved. Stay involved and watch this. The Joy of Football podcast, hosted by me, Neil Barnett, with Martin Tyler.
Looks like Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, the Joy of Football, the greatest addiction in the world, with Martin Tyler, the voice of the Premier League, and me, Neil Barnett. And one of the joys of football in England is the fantastic diversity that it has achieved down the years. But that diversity has meant that English managers are, how can I put this, crap in terms of winning things. No English manager has won the Premier League. And in fact, this century, we have only had 2 major trophies lifted by English managers. Which was, the last one was 16 years ago. Harry Redknapp won the FA Cup with Portsmouth in 2008. And the previous one was Steve McClaren in 2004, won the League Cup with Middlesbrough. That's it.
Actually, I was going to mention Middlesbrough before you went into this very nicely articulated opening, because I'm coming to your kitchen once a week now, and you're being very hospitable. The water is lovely, and the general ambience is very good. The lighting is superb. I feel like I'm on holiday. But I was trying to find a football analogy to know where we're going with this. And are we Middlesbrough Ironopolis, who only lasted a few years back in the 19th century? Or are we Thames Ironworks, which became West Ham United, and all of that stands for since? I don't know the answer to that, but you're going to have to find it out. Otherwise, I'm going to have to rent a room round the corner from here, because I'm coming here so often. So I hope you're enjoying what we're trying to do. And if you can encourage us to do more, please do so. If you want us to stop, we can take criticism. When you get to my age, you're quite used to it, to be honest with you. Neil's not so good with it, but let us know if we're hitting the right notes, or if you like bits that we do, maybe not enough of, or maybe you've got some ideas of your own. We're coming to a time where maybe we should be picking the player of the season for each club or something like that, which will probably, in contrast, we'd have differing views, because Neil and I do, which is why I think this works. But you'll decide. Back to the English managers.
The Joys of Football podcast at gmail.com.
Good. I'll take some iron tablets after that little bit to get me going through this.
English managers.
Yes. Sean Dyche is an absolute hero. He's done the most amazing job. You and I were at Stamford Bridge watching Everton trounce the biggest defeat that Sean's ever had as a manager. He's been a manager a long time. And to come back and do what they've done with 3 wins in a row, including beating Liverpool for the first time at Goodison Park for Yonks. So it doesn't have to mean trophies. There's a man who deserves a trophy with all the difficulties as we speak. It's an 8-point deduction. Might get less, might get more. We never know how it's going to finish this season, but they're safe. And I think that, yeah, of course, he'd love to hold up some silverware, but he should get a prize for doing what Sean Dyche has done. And he has brought into our consciousness the old football superstitions again. The suit's gone, the pristine white shirt's gone. He's got a tracksuit on for these. He looks like a manager from the generation where he was a player, and he was a decent player. I mentioned Chesterfield v Middlesbrough again, they get another mention in that FA Cup semi-final I was talking about in the last podcast.
1997.
Sean Dyche scored in that game for Chesterfield. He scored a penalty at Old Trafford in the FA Cup semi-final in 1997. Been around a long time, played over 500 games, managed well over 500 games. And I think what he's achieved, I get what you're saying, but football clubs, the top clubs, aren't run by English people. So they're global figures, the directors and the owners of the football clubs. They're going to look around the world, and our game can attract. It's just a consequence, like you go back to the pre-Premier League, and we mentioned it before, 12 foreigners for the first Premier League game ever. 12 foreigners in the first round of fixtures in the Premier League, August 1992. So it's moved on, and yes, you want English managers. Eddie Howe got to a final last year with Newcastle and has the potential.
I go back to even the 1990s, and there were only 4 trophy winners in the 1990s, 1 trophy each, and that was in the League Cup. You had Ron Atkinson for Aston Villa in 94, you had Roy Evans for Liverpool in 95, and you had Brian Little for Aston Villa in 96. And the other English manager...
And in 97, you had Bobby Robson.
Yeah, for Barcelona. In European Cup Winners' Cup. So those are the managers. Those are the only English managers to have won major trophies. And it's... I'm sorry, it's not good enough.
Well, I don't think it's a lack of managerial talent, and we talked about Mark Robbins recently on this programme. And if you get up with a team, then you've got a chance of staying there. But Sheffield United, it didn't work out for Paul Heckingbottom. Chris Wilder has managed in the Premier League. I think the recruitment is based on global issues. If they could, maybe we'd have very few English players. We've got 30-odd%, which I think is pretty good, and the talent is stunning, isn't it? Sparkling players that we're producing through our system. But whether there is something, sometimes I suppose it for British players to deal with foreign coaches, maybe there is sort of looking up to something different. It's not the sort of way that they've been educated through the system. Most of the academy coaches are English, aren't they? So where do they go? They stay in the academies.
Well, the other one...
I mean, Joe Edwards went from Chelsea's academy and found it hard at Millwall.
Millwall, I've left one out. Joe Royle won the FA
95,
Cup. At Everton. Yeah. So, but these weren't stellar coaches. I mean, obviously, you're talking about Sean Dyche, who's had a stellar career, if you like, in that he's had a Premier League career with small clubs overachieving. I don't mean that. Everton historically are a big club, but Burnley.
But would Manchester United, if they are looking to change, would they look at Sean Dyche? No. Why not?
Exactly. Because his type of football is backs to the wall.
But he's in clubs where the backs to the wall scenario dictates
Well, I mean, this leads to the big question that always infuriates me. Always infuriates me, people.
He's very easily infuriated.
And that is, people say, but could Pep manage a smaller club? Could he improve players? Could he do this, do that? He's got the best players in the world. Well, I think, fair question. So long as you say, but could the managers who are great backs to the wall managers, could they take the best players in the world, the elite players, and make them into a team that's going to win trophies? Because I think it's as hard to go one way as it is the other.
Well, it's not going to change, and I think we should. The global nature of the game is why the Premier League is so successful, why English football is so revered around the world, and that happened before the Premier League. I worked on overseas broadcasts in the 70s and 80s when the Football League, and if you go to certain parts of the world, they're Leeds United fans because they all watched Leeds United when they were in the golden period under Don Revie. So, whether it'll go round again, we must mention the British managers because we get really criticised if we don't talk about Alec Ferguson and Martin O'Neill and
George Graham and Graham Souness,
Mark
and Kenny
Hughes.
Dalglish, and even David Moyes now has won a trophy. The Scots win trophies.
Even David
the English
Moyes?
win naff all.
Yeah. Well, there is something about that. I think when I started covering the game, the Friday mornings were Scots v English of the team. They were probably more competitive matches, better to commentate on than some of the matches on the Saturday afternoon when they were playing on the same side. But there is something about that. I think the Scottish mentality that fits the detail, and they had data in their minds before data was even invented, before computers were invented. They knew it. Bob Paisley, who obviously is from the very north of England, had this wonderful filing system about injuries and illnesses before computers, all away in little drawers, filing cards and things like that, and was absolutely spot on. Now we're in a different marketplace, and what would you change? Would you want the game to go back to?
It's not that, but I look across, why should France have more successful managers than England? But I look at France, and Wenger won so much, and Zidane won so much, and Didier Deschamps is winning so much at international level, having won it at club level, and we don't have anyone like that, us English. And obviously the Spanish are dominating at the moment with Arteta and Guardiola, and the Germans have dominated with Klopp and Hansi Flick and their period of Tuchel, and the Portuguese did dominate for a while and still tell us about it, and it's England's failed.
I don't think it's failed. I just think it's lack of opportunity, and the coaching system, the badges they now have to get, and the way the game is educated now gives everybody an equal opportunity in terms of learning the qualifications. But you don't get an equal opportunity. Obviously, we've talked a lot about diversity as well, not being the coaches of colour don't get the opportunities. So that's another disadvantage, because there are a lot of people who could fit that description who are doing wonderful jobs in football at lower levels and don't get the opportunity. Those things have got to change. I just think you've got 20 clubs in the Premier League, 20 employers. I don't think you can go to them and say, well, you're not going to pick an English manager, because some of them do. Why, if you don't pick an English manager, why are you not doing that? Is it because you don't think they're good enough, or you think that somebody from elsewhere is better? I think it's the latter. I think they go for that. It's tough, but the managers that I'm lucky enough to know a lot of them personally, they're fighting for that right to be recognised at the very top of the tree. If
Gareth Southgate was to say after the Euros, I've had enough, and let's remember, so far he hasn't won a trophy in his managerial career. He's got relegation, but he hasn't won a trophy. If he were to say, I've had enough, who would be on the shortlist amongst Englishmen to succeed him?
Eddie Howe, for sure. I think he would be probably top of many people's list. He's got a lot of the qualities that Gareth's got outside of just the pure footballness of it. Gareth Southgate's brought peace and calmness to troubled waters, being part
of ever so well.
Yeah, part of the difficulties of. He's got to a final which I'm sure he would admit that he should have won. Most England fans think it was very winnable. The semi-final in Russia was a great achievement. Harry Kane misses. Harry Kane, who never misses, he misses a penalty in England. That you are down to moments when you're playing 14 games a season. You're definitely down to moments, and it will be interesting. I've said Sean Dyche should be considered by Manchester United. Gareth Southgate is being considered by Manchester United, we believe, and Sean maybe as well, because it's a fresh point of view. And they need some freshness. They need a different point of view, a different sense of purpose. And, maybe if you were sitting around the table with all those new influences at Manchester United, you could make the point and make the case that actually what you do need is something a bit closer to home. It was tough for David Moyes because it's straight on the back of Fergie. It's a terribly difficult job to follow. And since then, obviously, people have come and gone without. Have Manchester United lost that DNA that they had? I would suggest probably they have. So maybe somebody who's grown up in the country where Manchester United have had all those years of success and are looked upon with such reverence by so many people, then maybe that's the way forward. But people who are way above my pay grade, there's no pay grade for this, by the way, they're paid to make those decisions, and I think as observers we have to go along with it. Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, I was so given that Everton have had such a rough ride this season, for them to come out of it, even though the white shirt went, the white flag was never raised, and they fought on through. And I just think Sean deserves a mention on this, because he's not somebody he might be down his local pub having people raise a few glasses to him, but he's not one who's going to go into the media and say, I've done this, I've done that. He just gets on with it, and he'll be looking to win more games before the end of the season.
I think the guy who'll get it won't be either of those two, because the history of the FA tells you that they promoted Gareth Southgate from the under-21s, and it was a successful promotion after Sam Allardyce and his one game. And of course, England under-21s actually won the Europeans recently for the first time since the 1970s, was it, when Dave Sexton was in charge?
Early 80s, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
And that was Lee Carsley.
Yes. Lee Carsley, who is English by nationality, but Irish, of course, by football nationality.
Yeah.
And is very much, he's a great guy, Lee. Just a little story. He was maybe the academy manager at Brentford, and I was coaching at Hampton Richmond, a pre-season friend, very close to Brentford geographically. We had a pre-season friendly against them, and it was mostly academy lads, one or two senior players. And they came in a minibus, and Lee drove the minibus. And I can remember seeing him, and he played international football, played Premier League football, and here he was. If you know Hampton Richmond's ground, there's hardly any room for manoeuvre, and he was trying to get this in through a space to park up and come and get his boots dirty at that kind of level. And so if it was to be Lee, and certainly I'd personally be thrilled for him.
On the back of everything you've said, I've just remembered something. I interviewed James Tarkowski during the course of the season, and asked him about Sean Dyche and about the spirit that always seems to be at Everton, even when they're struggling.
And he was with him at Burnley, of course, as well.
Yeah. And this is what he had to say.
James, what is the difference this season to the season since you came?
Playing better, scoring goals, defending better. We're just building something here. We are. It's more than just the way we play. It's the spirit of the team. I think on the eye you can just see it. We just look a different side. So we're fighting for every point in every game.
And do you do things together in order to improve that, achieve that?
I think it's more of a day-to-day thing. I think you can do these little team bonding sessions where you go to a dinner or you go canoeing together or something. I don't know, but in general, it's the day-to-day process of working together, the way we train. The way we treat each other, the way we are around each other, they're really important factors. And we've found the real important team spirit at the minute. We've got to keep that going.
James Tarkowski there, Everton, of course, talking about Sean Dyche and spirit, coming to you in association with Sirius XM from USA and Canada. Right, three of the best.
And makes them pay.
Ta-da! Right, okay. Young player, old player, and player. Your young player this week.
Yeah, the last Premier League game I commentated on was Villa Park and against Chelsea. It was a very eventful game. And Morgan Rogers, who I'd spotted playing for West Brom in an FA Cup replay a while ago. I think it was against Brighton. He came on. There was a lot of noise around him as a youngster at West Brom, and so much noise that Manchester City took him. It's a bit like Patrick Roberts from Fulham, and went to Manchester City and didn't quite come up the kind of answer that the player would have wanted. I don't know any of the background to that, whether City just felt that it wasn't going to work technically or whatever, or ability-wise, or there were other, say, family factors involved. You tend not to find these things out. So then he went to Middlesbrough, played, and actually... Morgan, actually, Patrick Roberts went to Middlesbrough as well, didn't he? I think. I don't know. Morgan Rogers, you get me confused now, Neil. Morgan Rogers, he played for Middlesbrough, got to the semi-finals of the League Cup, played at Chelsea, scored at Chelsea. It was a consolation goal. But they were moving heaven and earth to Villa to get him in during the winter transfer window, when that doesn't happen very often. I think the price was very competitive. I'm not sure how that has shaken down, whether there are lots of add-ons to various other clubs. But he's got in the team. He scored a couple of goals before the game against Chelsea, and an assist, I think, as well. And it was a clever goal. I think he almost gave the goalkeeper the eyes from the edge of the penalty area and slotted it in at the near post. But what impressed me, he was bigger than I thought. Maybe in the time seeing him as a kid at West Brom, and then
he's good 6'1".
Yeah. And he'd had a growth spurt, but he carried the power of his running was good, and they kept him on. Whereas they had to make changes, and Moussa Diaby came on and then got taken off again.
Yeah.
So, and he wasn't best pleased with that, and that's one of the great insults in football, isn't it? You feel personally as a player, whatever the reason behind it. But Morgan played well. It was tough. Second half, Chelsea were much better team for most of the match, actually, but certainly in the second half. But I just thought he's one that he keeps playing like that. He looked absolutely in place, playing for a team that's fourth in the Premier League, remember, not just a team that's hanging on in there. And I thought shrewd buying, and the comparison really between Unai Emery and Mauricio Pochettino, my guess, and it's a pretty informed guess, is that Unai Emery would say, we're having him, I want him, go and get him, to those who do the deals. Whereas for Pochettino, they got all the players in and said, oh, blind, we've got to find somebody to manage this lot. And he's having to do it in a very different set of circumstances. I describe the difference really as that Unai Emery's been given the keys to the club, and Poch has probably been given the keys to the training ground, you know, and that's no disrespect to the way Chelsea want to do it, but it looked good business to me.
And it's quite interesting because with the transfer window especially, it raises the question of how many players have scored for two different clubs against the same club in the same season. But Morgan Rogers has done it against Chelsea, and I don't forgive him. I'm one. But good player, I agree. I've got two young players this week, and the reason I've got two is that they're both left backs. And I have seen for a couple of years now Ryan Ait-Nouri,
yeah.
Ryan Ait-Nouri Nouri at Wolves. He went out on loan in between. I think he went to the Netherlands, but he's French, isn't he? But he played a couple of years ago when he'd only been 20 against Chelsea at Molineux, and he had a ferocious game. He was terrific. I mean, ferocious as in just up and down the flank, and looked a really good prospect. I was surprised when he went out on loan, but he's come back, and he's in the team this season under Gary O'Neill. And he's had another...
And what is Gary O'Neill?
English.
Exactly.
Yes. England shortlist? No, won't happen. But deserves it.
Well, you've already named the new manager, so, you know, the joy of football told you first. Well, half of it did anyway.
But he's scoring goals now. He's getting into goal-scoring positions. He's a real modern left-back who can play in the midfield. And I think he's a very good young player. But the one who's just come out of nowhere this season is the Hungarian Milos Kerkez. Is that right pronunciation?
Milos
Kerkez at Bournemouth, who has been terrific every time I've seen him. And he's tiny. He's a bit like, do you remember Angelino at Manchester City, who went to RB Leipzig? Angelino, and is he in Turkey? No, I can't remember where he is now. But Kerkez has got the most wonderful left foot, and he's lighting up the Vitality Stadium down there in Bournemouth, and is a really good player. And he's just 20, signed in the summer and last summer, and just two young left backs. And I will come on to why I've chosen two young left-backs in a moment, but I think they are two absolute treasures in the Premier League this season. Your old player.
Yeah, my old player.
He hasn't told me. He wouldn't tell me who it is.
It's because it's to do with Neil. And since I've been doing this podcast, I have to confess that almost everywhere I go, I come across ex-Chelsea people. And of course, it's always a pleasure, but it just seems I didn't really notice that before, but it's the Barnett influence really that seems to make me think Chelsea or whatever. I went to see Oxford United train last Thursday with Alan Dowson, the manager I've worked with in non-league football. Oxford United have been extremely helpful under a number of managers, loaning players into non-league football, including Shandon Baptiste, who's now a Premier League player with Brentford, Sam Long, who's the club captain, I think, at Oxford, who was on the way out until he came to us at Hampton Richmond. We got him games and got him fit, and he went back. He did it. We just gave him the opportunity, but he did it, and he's still a player there. But the guy who's really helped is Derek Fazackerley, a former coach, a great player with Blackburn, strong centre half, coach at Newcastle, Manchester City, and England, of course, as well. A great lieutenant to Kevin Keegan, and he's not quite as old as me. He's about your age, Neil, but in better condition. And but we went to say thanks, really, because he's even right to the end of this season, he'd helped us out with a player. So it was just a nice. So we walked into the scenario where Oxford were 2 days away from their game that would decide whether they're in the playoffs or not. So on Saturday, so we had a lovely time, looked after, said hi to everybody. Josh McEachran, I see him as well, so Chelsea everywhere, you know. And he used to live around the corner from me in near the training ground. And anyway, I'm now driving on Saturday lunchtime to Villa for the Villa game against who? Chelsea. But I think I'm listening to the commentary on the radio of the game at West Ham. And suddenly I see a sign to Oxford. I'm going past it, of course, on the M40 up to Birmingham. I thought, I wonder, it was 12:30 kickoff, Exeter v Oxford United. So I get there and I twiddle around with the dials. It's not easy to do when you're trying to drive fast, and I don't recommend it. But I found BBC Radio Oxford, and there was the match. And they were 1-0 up away to Exeter. And during the period I was listening, they got a penalty, which turned out to be the winning goal. It finished 2-1, and they did, because other results went their way. They have made the playoffs, and well done to Oxford United, and Faz in particular. But then I was listening to the commentary. I thought, this local radio, sometimes it's not quite as streamlined as you might expect from a national broadcast. It was very good. I don't know the name of the who sounded young, who was setting off on his career, and I wish him well. He was doing the play-by-play, my job, if you like. But I was really taken by the guy who was doing the co-commentary. He had a sort of combination of good knowledge, but inside information, you know. And it was all done with a little hint of an Oxfordshire burr as well, and a really good, strong, powerful voice. So I hung on till half time. I was sort of going almost out of the reach of the signal from Oxford. And I found out it's another of yours, Peter Rhodes-Brown, ex-Chelsea, of course, from the Oxford area. Was he from Oxford United?
He went to Oxford United after he left us.
Well, he's obviously still very connected there. But it was great. And I said to Neil, when I told him this, I didn't tell him I was going to be my old player, but I said to them, when you speak to him next, because he speaks to all the old Chelsea players, tell him how much I enjoyed his commentary. And it was really good. And I, obviously, with a little bit of a vested interest, having had all this help from Oxford United, I was delighted that I caught a bit of what was a very big day for them.
Peter Rhodes-Brown had a couple of sensational games at Stamford Bridge, not for Chelsea, but for Oxford United after he left. I don't think he had a sensational game when he was at Chelsea. But he when he finished his career, he didn't go into management. He went into what was then the new football in the community. And he's been in charge of their football in the community ever since. And he is one of those diamond people who have had a career in football, but who have had a career in improving the world and the community around the football club. And he is an absolute legend in Oxford for the work that he's done on behalf of the community.
I love listening to fellow broadcasters, because you know the pitfalls of the job, being one of the people in the profession, and it's very easy for those who don't understand the difficulties. You never know what the commentary position's like, the numbers on the show. By the way, after praising Newcastle for having the squares, and they go back and play against Sheffield United with the old shirts on, with the red numbers straight on the stripe. So that was a personal disappointment. But it was a very good broadcast on behalf of a very helpful football club.
My old player is Thiago Motta, who, of course, won the Champions League with Inter Milan, though he didn't play in the final because he was suspended after Sergio Busquets got them sent off in the semi-final. If you remember, he feigned injury and looked up through his arm in order to see if Motta was getting the red card, and he did. But Inter Milan still beat them and over the two legs, and went on to win. But Thiago Motta is now manager of Bologna, who are fourth in Serie A and looking strong to get into the Champions League. I don't think Bologna have ever been in the Champions League. And here is another young manager in the wake of how well Xabi Alonso, who we've talked about before, has done, who is really pulling up roots, who's not English, pulling up roots and making a big impression. And as a footballer, we're going to come on to this in a moment, but as a footballer, Thiago Motta, for me, when he was at Paris Saint-Germain, after he left Inter Milan, was a terrific anchor midfielder for them. And when he left, they never replaced him, and they've struggled to be as good since. It's only really this season, when they've got a proper team together rather than a bunch of Galacticos, that they haven't missed him. Thiago Motta was a very, very good footballer.
He always seemed to have time, and yet his natural movement wasn't rapid, but he always made time for himself. You can see why he's a good manager. He obviously thought a lot about his football when he was playing, and he's one certainly to keep an eye on. And I think it's a good choice now.
Who's your player this week?
Well, I've the few candidates, but he's almost my old player, really, and forgive me for saying this, but Jamie Vardy, who has got played a big part in Leicester getting back into the Premier League, and overjoyed with it. And it's brought back all the memories of that title-winning season, and his fantastic goal run, his sheer exuberance, which you would have thought as he's got older, a really older player, that would go and that his game would go. But in bursts, he still got it. And I'm sure he'll be spending the summer making sure he works on that. And it may be a different kind of role in the Premier League, or maybe not. Maybe he's going to lead the charge back into the big time. But my happiest memory of Jamie really was nothing that I was really party to. Of course, he scored goals and he got the hold. Probably when you get up from the Championship, you just hold the back page. You don't probably hold the front page yet, but maybe he'll be doing that again next season. But after the title, the title was won, as you remember, at Stamford Bridge when Spurs failed to beat Chelsea. How did Chelsea get another mention? And they played Everton, and the trophy was presented at the end of that. And then the players stayed on the field, and very kindly, it's part of the excellent Sky work that they do on the title day, where they're allowed to have the hosts, Dave Jones or Kelly Cates, who's ever presenting on the show, on the pitch, and the players come and go. We talked about Eden Hazard and Gary Neville. And this one, Jamie was just there all the time. He just didn't want to go in. It was like he, more than anybody, having come from non-league football and had to work so hard to get a career at any level, he didn't want this moment ever to end. He stayed, and I gather he was barking the instructions about who should be interviewed and whatever should happen when the celebration happened the other night. And it would be great to see him again, to see him in that context, to see him on the pitch. But he's a really interesting man, and I just thought that appreciation, and that those moments don't last. You don't really want that kind of day to end. It's professionally, it's the greatest day in his life, whatever happens from now on, really, and certainly up to that point. So, and he milked it rightly, and I use the term as a compliment. He didn't want to go in. Gradually they drifted in, but for Leicester, it was like, we have won it. We have got our medals. We have got the trophy. Whew, fairy tale.
A few weeks ago, we were talking about natural finishers. When Vardy found his mojo in the Premier League, he suddenly was an absolute natural finisher. When he was through on goal, it was a goal.
Took his shots early, I think. That was perhaps the key to it. But finishers find it very hard to explain how they do it. They either do it or they don't. And the old player called Jigsaw because he falls to pieces in the box. There have been plenty of those about, far more of those than there have been of Jamie Vardy. And it is a process. The thoughtful ones think about you through the goalkeeper. What should you do? You're going to lift it over him. Each situation is different. You're going to go to one side, try and go round him, nutmeg him. I always am amazed that players do that. I mean, gosh, it's something that you really have to be very precise about. But the goalkeepers do spread, so the space is there. Or others just do it, and just you just think, well, they've probably been doing it since the school playground.
Thierry Henry,
Yeah.
Well, Vardy, the most goals in the Premier League over the age of 30, isn't he?
Yeah, he's probably getting the most over 36, isn't he, or something like that.
Right. I haven't got a player, and the reason I haven't got a player, I go back to my young players, the two of them. I'm struggling to even remember their names, Aït-Nouri and Kerkez. I haven't got a player because just as English managers over the era of the Premier League have not been a major success, this season, left-backs have been a disaster. If I were choosing the PFA 11 of the season, the Premier League 11 of the season, who would I put at left-back? So I haven't got one. So this is my quick rundown on Premier League left-backs this season. Arsenal have switched between Zinchenko, Tomiyasu and Kiwior, who's been injured for most of the season. Manchester City have switched between Ake and Gvardiol, who's not a left-back and doesn't look like a left-back. And they haven't been as good defensively this season as previously. For Liverpool, Robertson's been injured most of the season. Tsimikas came in, he's been injured. Gomez, who is a centre-half or a right-back, has played there a lot of the season.
Nearly scored goals playing left-back because he was coming in on his right foot, and of course he still hasn't, Joe. Still hasn't scored a goal.
Villa, he clearly, the manager wanted to go with Marino at the beginning of the season, but finished up having to go with Dania because...
Digne.
Because
and Moreno. Honestly,
Moreno.
I should do this before we start recording.
We're going to come on to this in a moment. So they haven't had one. Tottenham have had a regular left-back in Udogie. But
Udogie? Yeah.
Udogie. But he's injured at the end of the season. And I've got to say, I've seen him quite a few times. I don't rave about him as much as my American-Italian friends do, who, because he's Italian, he's all right. He's all right.
He's got room to grow as well, hasn't he? He's not looked out of place coming in getting his first team chance this season.
Manchester United, Shaw's been injured most of the season.
Well, that's the story.
Malasia's been injured most of the season. They took Reguilon on loan. Wan-Bissaka and Darlow have played that disaster. Newcastle, Dan Burns not been the same as he was the last season. They signed Matt Targett. He's not a top.
But he's been injured.
Yeah, level centre back. Timo Livramento's played there a lot. He's a right back. Although I remember him as a right winger as a youth player. And Lewis Hall they signed, and he's not played. So I get down to West Ham, and Emerson has probably been the most consistent left back in the Premier League this season. But of course, he's no longer the Italy left back, even though he was Brazilian and he shouldn't have been playing for Italy. My Chelsea, Colwell started the season at left back. Chilwell's been injured most of the season. Cucurella's been out for a lot of it. Bournemouth and Wolves, they're the left backs I'm talking about. My best left back last season was Estupiñán at Brighton, but he's been injured most of the season. They played a centre half at left back for a lot of the season, Igor Julio, who's been awful. And now they've got some guy. They signed a 19-year-old Argentine in January, Valentin Barco. Now The next
You
teams
haven't mentioned Anthony Robinson, who's not had a great season either.
at Fulham. Well,
Yeah.
I was going to say the next teams: Robinson at Fulham, Tarek Mitchell at Crystal Palace, who's I don't think the best left back going. To be fair, at Everton, Vitaly Mikolenko's had quite a good season against the traffic, which has regularly been coming down his side. Then you go to Brentford. Rico Henry, who's been such a crucial part of their Premier League history,
Big miss for Brentford,
has been out most of the season. I've seen Vitaly Janelt, who's a midfielder, play there. I've seen Aaron Hickey, who's a right-back, play there. Now they've signed Sergio Reguilon on the loan. And then you get down to Forest. Ola Aina, my old right-back at Chelsea youth, has been playing left-back. He's half do-footed, yeah. Nuno Tavares, Harry Toffoli's keeping out 2 regular left-backs. And then you're into the bottom 3. Luton, Alfie Doherty, who you know a bit about.
Alfie Doughty, who was on loan at Kingstonian and was going to be a National League player at Bromley. Basically, that's what it was. He's done amazingly well. And when we played against him at Woking, we played at Bromley, and he was like in the dugout. He's in front of you, galloping out on the touchline. You still think, oh, he was at Kingstonian, and he's done well to get this far. Look at him now. And actually, Adebayo, the striker, it's not on the theme really, but the year we played Watford the third round of the FA Cup, we beat Swindon in the second round, and he came on as a sub, and they were 1-0 down, and we won 1-0. And you go, I saw Mick Harford at a game the other day, the Luton connection, you know, and I said, he said, you just need one chance to make the grade, as Mick did himself. It's another Chelsea connection, but. I thought, and for Carlton Morris to get 10 goals in the Premier League is a great thing as well. And Alfie's provided some of those with some great crosses. So he's done well. And whatever happens to Luton, I hope he continues on that upward trend.
Burnley got Charlie Taylor at left back, he was their second choice in the Championship. They had Ian Martson on loan. So he's going to have 2 successive seasons getting relegated unless they survive. Sheffield United haven't really got a left back. They play Max Lowe there, who's a midfielder, or Austin Trusty as a centre back.
I saw Austin Trusty play against Arsenal. They had a tough time, but of all the games I've seen this season, I've never seen as intense a performance in the first 20 minutes as Arsenal obviously thought if we let Sheffield United rise to the occasion, we could have a mess up here. They were right at it, and I think they were 2 up after 4 minutes or something. David Raya was racing to get the ball behind the goal when it went up his end to keep the pressure on. It was if they do win the league, Arsenal, I'll remember that as just an indication of what they're about. And a similar story with Manchester City. Fulham played them, and City had a player sent off. And Marco Silva told me later, he said, I've never seen a team with 10 men give such an intense performance. He said that they were dusted themselves down immediately and went for it and won the game, you know. So those are the best teams do those kind of things that I'm describing. But Luke Shaw's, he's somebody I was coaching a school team a long time ago, and we played a local school, and they brought this kid out with shoulders wider than all 4 of our players, or 5 or 6, all 4 of our outfield players put together. And it was Luke. And I'm told, as the lad is still playing non-league football, that I asked somebody to man mark him because he came with a reputation. And the lad's still dining out. He's called James Richmond. He's playing for Enfield in the Isthmian League. So he's had a career as well. He's the same age as Luke. So I did pick somebody, but I don't remember doing that. But so I've seen Luke from there, and he's been tremendous. I mean, he's had his downs. The injury was awful, and the Mourinho experience wasn't great, and whatever. But they've really missed him, and he can play left centre back in a 3 as well. So I think from England's point of view, he's supposed to be back training, Luke. So I hope he is, and therefore England have got a chance of taking him because someone who's already scored for England in a final ought to be revved up to go again. That really, fingers crossed, Luke.
Right, now the difference between a commentator and me is that the commentator's got to get the pronunciation right, which is where we go now with Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler.
Yes, Neil, here we go. On the commentary circuit, one of the great joys is meeting up with ex-players from around the world who have hung up their boots and picked up a microphone to stay involved in the game. One regular I love to stop and chat with is the former Liverpool star and Denmark international Jan Molby, or Mølby, as it is pronounced in his native Danish. It's always been my wish to say the names of the foreigners who've come into the Premier League as they would be said in their own country, but I couldn't get Mølby across the line. I did better with another Liverpool Scandinavian. Concluding a live interview when he just arrived, I was told to hand back to the host of the coverage, but disobeyed my boss to squeeze in one more question. How do you pronounce your name? Glenn Hussein, he replied, and that was on the record. Even though it was spelt Hyson, in our language if you like, the correct version caught on. Still with the Scandinavian names, but much more recently, a superstar has given we broadcasters strict instructions that his name has two pronunciations. If you are Norwegian, you may call their mega striker Erling Haaland. But elsewhere in the world, he insists that Haaland is the way he wants it. And nearly at the end of his second season here, you know that like so often on the field, he's got his way. But that has left me with a historical problem. His dad, who played for Leeds and Nottingham Forest as well as Manchester City, was not so dogmatic. On the Premier League's own excellent channel, which is available around the world but not in this country, they produced a brilliant feature last weekend. Stuart Pearce, another top bloke to catch up with on the commentary circuit, was reminiscing about the day he was thrust into the player-manager role for Nottingham Forest. It was December 1996. Frank Clark, the manager, had skipped off to Manchester City. Forest were at home to Arsenal. Stuart had for the first time in his life to pick a team, and according to legend, had originally done it without including a goalkeeper. I was the commentator on that day at the City Ground, and it was interesting hearing the game back as I'd forgotten some of the detail. Ian Wright gave Arsenal the lead, no surprise in that. But Forest found a two-goal hero to give Stuart a most unlikely win. The scorer of both goals, as described by me, was a certain Alf Inge Haaland, Erling's father. When Erling scored his Premier League debut double at West Ham and Alfie was in the ground watching, we all knew to say that it was Haaland who was off and running in the goal-scoring charts. So some 20 years apart, 26 years in fact, I'd commentated on father and son, both scoring 2 goals to win a Premier League game. But I'm still troubled, as only a commentator can be, by the fact that their name did not sound the same. Unlike Erling, some players do waver. Paulo Wanchope was already making his name, that name, at Derby when prior to a Rams match he approached the Match of the Day commentary doyen Barry Davis and myself and announced that his family name was really Wanchope, and would we adjust accordingly? So we both did. Now, this was the early days of Sky, so my audience was comparatively small. But Match of the Day had its strong core following, most of whom were surprised to hear the change, even with the explanation. Neither Barry nor I gave it any more thought until a few Saturdays later we found ourselves at the same game again. Again, it involved Derby County. Paulo approached us again, and we expected a little thank you for doing his bidding. Anything but. He told us that the change of name had not gone down at all well in the East Midlands, and please would we revert to Wanchope, despite the family wishes. We scratched our heads, looked at him, and did as we was bid a second time. It's not an exclusively imported problem, I have to say. At a high-profile new signing press conference at Newcastle to celebrate the arrival of a player called Jermaine Jenas, at the time, from Nottingham Forest, Jermaine proclaimed that his surname should be pronounced Genus. His dad had told him that if he didn't tell everyone that day, it would be wrong forever. On his Newcastle debut the very next day, he thrashed in a 25-yarder, and a certain Sky commentator on that game, armed with the player's request, of course, could not resist. When the goal went in, linking Genus with genius. A bit cheesy, but I happen to know that Jermaine loves it.
It's amazing that you say that, because I mentioned him earlier on, the left-back Ola Aina, to me. When he was 16, he got in the Chelsea youth team, I'd say to him, how do you want your name pronounced, Aina? And it was Ola Aina.
And what about Brozier as he was. He lives in Slough, brought up in Slough.
Born in
Chelsea.
Hammersmith.
Yeah, and he
Plays
was
for
he was
Albania.
Brozier, but when he went to play for Albania, his family sort of locked him into Brozier, yeah. And
But he's back as Brozier again now, I believe.
well, I haven't done him yet. I'll check. 'Cause every time I ask him, and I've asked him probably 5 or 6 times, I get the opposite answer from the previous one.
Yeah.
So I guess, listen, it's he wants his name to be shouted, whether it's correctly or not doesn't matter really. I think if goal comes with it.
He needs to get some pitch time then, because he's gone on loan to Fulham.
And
he's not managed to start a game yet. But it is. It's a difficulty all over. It is. And how much discussion is there amongst commentators when you go to games about it?
There's a bit, but I think we all feel that some are very linguistically good, some totally find it really difficult, want to anglicise everything. But you can get, if you can get access to the player and ask the player. I mean, I had one.
Who's the one you've had most trouble with?
What, pronouncing? It's more convincing people that I'm using the right term. If you go back a long time, everyone used to call him Michel Platini, didn't they? And it's Platini.
Yeah, obviously.
Like Barcola, moving to the current French setup. And I did a game before the 82 World Cup. France played a warm-up game against, I think, Real Sociedad. They're based in Bilbao. And it didn't go down too well with my producers. That in my commentary I called him Platini, and it was challenged on the lines of, we think it's Platini, and in a very much more impolite way than I'm saying to you now, I said, well, he doesn't think that. I survived by the skin of my teeth.
Yeah, it is. It is hard. The one I had most trouble with, surprisingly, was the Crystal Palace captain. I'm not even going to try it now. For many years, with the beard, the midfielder.
Jelinek.
No.
Milivojevic.
I couldn't. It was just one syllable too many.
Yeah.
I remember announcing his name on the pitch doing the lineups once, and absolutely.
Milivojevic, yeah.
I couldn't get that extra
You
syllable.
have to remember that there's not an up and down in it. It's all the same. Milivojevic, like Milutinovic, and one or two others from that part of the world.
Yeah.
It's the Poles are the difficult one, and the Scandinavians, because they have letters that we don't have. I mean, we're talking about Molby. The O is this strange thing with an O with a line through it, so it's a different letter. Odegaard, yeah.
And who's the guy with the click in the middle of his name?
Oh no, I can't even go there. In South Africa, in the World Cup, if you look at the starting 11 for South Africa in the 2010 World Cup opening game against Mexico, one of the players, it's a Corsa, I think the language is. You have to say the first bit, they go, and then say the second bit. And I never got it right. In fact, I've only been taught recently that the way that I should have done it then. Some you can't win them all, and I think the viewers need consistency really. But when you've spoken to a player and he's made it quite clear that that's how he wants his name said, you can't really be responsible for the other commentators if they choose to do it a different way. I think everybody knows in the end. At least now we've got the names on the back of the shirts, haven't we? So we have had for almost all the Premier League.
But it is amazing because the one I always remember, of course, so you'll know only too well, Gus Poyet.
Yeah.
In Uruguay, where he's from.
Poget,
yeah. Which even the Spanish, and he's Spanish.
Yeah, the
is his
double
first
L
language.
in Spanish is, it's difficult. But I think the Portuguese ones, we just finish on this because we could go on all day and do another 10 podcasts on it, Portuguese is really difficult. The Manchester United number 8 is Bruno Fernandes.
In Portugal.
Yeah, and if I said that, I'd be laughed out of the commentary box, wouldn't I? But that's what it is. And we get sent. It's very good at the Premier League. They get the players who must get fed up with doing it every year. They say their name to the cameras so that the world broadcasters can get it. And Bruno comes up and goes, Bruno Fernandes, and we all call him Bruno Fernandes. Bruno, apologies.
Right, let's go on to Best Time of Our Lives, which is where we look at some clubs and try and remember the best times, the most entertaining, the most joy they've given us, not their best team, the most joy. And we're doing some more Champions League teams this week. The team that's won it the second most times after Real Madrid is AC Milan.
Well, I think we divide this up, that Neil talks generally about a period, I talk about games really, because that's been my involvement. The 88-89 Milan team, Sacchi, and obviously controlling it, Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten, Frank Rijkaard, amazing. It was like get three from the same country, wasn't it? It's almost you bought a job lot. Inter had the German players, but the three that Milan got, fantastic.
I mean, and you had Maldini and just such a great back line.
There was something about Italy, style, as well as the football, the culture, the food. He's a great food expert, by the way. And we must get onto that best food. No, I can't say that, but it's very good at Chelsea.
In the press room,
it is
the
very
best.
good. And, there is just players who've gone to play in Italy come back differently. They come back with a little bit more confidence, a little bit more worldliness.
I always say that if I were to be young now and was going to choose a club where I was going to follow them home and away, that one of the big arguments for choosing a club in Serie A or even any league division in Italy is the beautiful towns that so many of them play in. I've been to games in Vicenza a couple of times. What a fabulous little town that is. I've been to Udine, where Udinese play. It's a lovely little town. And
Brescia, that's right, very nice. Yeah. I was talking to an ex-Brescia player this morning. Can you believe that? And he loved living there. And it's the country. Unfortunately, when we go as visitors, like for Champions League games, things like that, you get, like the players, you get an overnight, and maybe you have to stay the night after the game when the teams fly home. But unless you really make a point of doing the tourist bit, you don't get to get the flavour of it really, which is
anywhere I go for football or
sounds
not
like
for
a
football.
song.
Anywhere I go for football or not football, the two places I have to visit are the football stadium and the best restaurants, or my best. Cathedrals, I'll leave that to other people.
Talk to my family. Everywhere we went for family holidays, we had to go to the football stadium. Best restaurants we couldn't afford.
I just want to mention somebody else in that era of Milan, Franco Baresi. In a period now where we're used to centre-backs being able to play, he could play as well as anybody in history from centre-back.
Yeah, and he had a brother, of course, who was a high-quality player as well, Beppe Baresi. I think Italy thought they invented defending, didn't they? I mean, the Catenaccio and all the early stuff in the 60s and 70s. But then they realised that there was the joy of football could involve not just keeping clean sheets. And that period, it was sort of when it got the best of the defending and the best of the attacking. It was captivating stuff. I was lucky to 3 or 4 seasons working before the Premier League started, working on Sundays doing Serie A games. Used to fly out from Heathrow on a Sunday morning, get to the ground, get back the same night, day trip to the best football that was available at the time.
Ruud Gullit once told me that game where they beat Real Madrid 5-0 at the San Siro, that he can still remember lining up on the centre circle with Van Basten. He said they had no tactical instructions at all as the forwards. They just knew that they were going to win and had to win. And he said, we were literally standing there going, get that whistle and let's go. And they just tore into them. And
we should get them on for the Voice of Passion when you need a rest by the sound of it.
Right, yeah, so we're agreed on that with Milan. What about Bayern Munich?
Yeah, that's... I go back to the 70s where they were, of course, European champions 3 years in a row, but I think the Ribéry and Robben time. Arjen Robben, oh God, who did they used to play for? This is a
Top
theme,
man.
by the way.
But when Thomas Muller came into the team, Thomas Muller, was he there for the 2010 Champions League final? He just made it by then, I think.
He played in the World Cup in 2010, didn't he?
So when they lost to Inter Milan, but in the 2013, with Muller pulling the strings and Ribéry. and
Terrific guys to deal with, Mats Hummels and people like that. I'm talking about German internationals, Philipp Lahm and Toni Kroos, was brilliant in English, funny, and Thomas Muller, very funny. But when Arjen Robben was living near the Chelsea training ground, he was walking his dog through Oxshott Woods on a very rainy day, and I was caked in mud trying to keep my fitness for the Gantry up. And he just burst out laughing when I came into view, and I went, "Listen, I'm the one with the microphone." But I only ever used it to say, "Wow, what a player!" And what a player! And he got the winner at Wembley in the Champions League final.
And I got he got the winner in 2013, and I got him on the radio the next day live. And he came on for about 20 minutes and talked football, and he told this fabulous story. I said to him, "Your best mate when you were at Chelsea was Petr Cech. And in the Champions League final, before you won it in 2012, he saved a penalty from you. How did that affect, and of course you lost it, how did that affect your friendship?" And he said, that summer, I was organising a secret birthday party for my wife. And it wasn't just him and I who were friends, his wife and my wife were friends. And they came, I invited. They came to our party. So a couple of months later, there we were in our garden in
you move on, don't you?
Netherlands, and it was fine. It was fine.
Probably the ones that we haven't forgiven was Neuer because of the Frank Lampard. Oh God, who was he playing for at the time? In 2010 in Bloemfontein, when the ball was, I know it, as any proper pro would do, tried to cover it up, and he covered it up very well. But just on Arjen Robben, was he the first inverted winger coming in from the right on his left foot? Everybody does it now, and he must have been at the forefront of that.
Well, Messi as well.
Yes,
because when Robben was at Chelsea and at Real Madrid, he played on the left wing, didn't he? It was really Bayern Munich who
that made him into that, because Ribéry wanted to play. He was inverted on the other side. But that was, to me, that was the best of Bayern. But I do think,
I agree. Again,
as a part of my job as a broadcaster is to get to talk to the players, and the ones that will help you. And I was certainly one of those. But the players in Germany, talking of Munich, not a lot of countries will, even though the players speak English, will do the press conferences in English. But if and sometimes with Hummels, for example, someone would say, "Oh, do you mind if I ask you a question in English?" And he goes, "No, that's great. I want to practice my English," or something like that. So there's a lot of joy. I have to say, I'm sitting here really because of 5 decades of joy with the greatest game in the world, with some of the greatest people in the world as well.
Let's move on quickly. Ajax.
Yes, similar stuff really. I guess the years I hadn't started doing much broadcasting. I was just about a football journalist, I think, when they won their 3 in a row in the 70s, and Johan Cruyff came from nowhere. One thing I did do, I just started, and there was a guy called Tommy Lawrence who was an England amateur international centre forward, and he became a travel agent, but he knew football, and he put on these flights to midweek European games. And I think it was Ajax Bayern, 72, something like that. And I saw an advert for this, £19 return or something. Anyway, so I bought myself a ticket just to go and see the game. So fly out in the morning, have a bit of lunch, fly back that night. And I got to the airport, and it was full of coaches and managers who'd all taken the opportunity to go. Laurie McMenemy was one of them. I remember that, who, of course, became such a success at Southampton. And we flew there, and the seats were like at the back of the chicken run, really. There was nothing grand about the seats, but I think they won. Ajax won, I haven't looked this up, it's totally off the top of my head, but Ajax might have won 3-0. And it was just breathtaking. It was almost like having your eyes open wider than they could ever been before in terms of appreciating total football. Became the label for it.
The coach,
Rinus Michels,
yeah, is considered one of the most game-changing coaches in history, isn't he?
Yeah. Special guy, Rudy Kroll, who became captain after Cruyff and was captain in the 78 World Cup and was the fixer. I was working for ITV, and of course they got to the final. And so anytime an interview was required, I was dispatched to their training camp to do the deal with Rudy. And it worked very well, so much so that after the final, which they lost narrowly, very narrow, it went in extra time, they hit the post and everything. I went to the hotel afterwards. It was really, when I look back now, how sort of inappropriate it probably was. But we got on so well. I said, win, lose, couldn't have been a draw, win or lose, I'll come and buy you a beer at the end of it. You've been great to help me and my television company. And I went. And they obviously were as crestfallen as you can imagine a team would be, having perhaps deserved to win the World Cup, but not having won it. But he stuck to his end of the bargain. We had a drink. And I said, it's time. I said, I'll leave you. It's time to go. And funny enough, 40 years later, I met Mario Kempes, who was the destroyer of the Dutch that day, also at the World Cup in 2018. And we got talking about the final, and he said, the Dutch didn't come to the banquet. It was terrible. We felt very let down about it. They were sulking. I said, no, I can tell you from first-hand evidence. I went to the hotel. It was impossible to get out. I just about got in, and the traffic and the security and everything, they would have liked to have come, was my impression, but they couldn't. So maybe I righted a tiny wrong all those years later. Yeah.
Was he one of the players who had a better international career than club career?
He had that World Cup. I mean, he had a good club career, didn't he, in Valencia?
Valencia,
I think. Yeah.
It was okay. But, I mean, he looked the best player in the world in that World Cup, I thought.
Yeah, that's another story about shirt numbers, but we've had enough for one shirt.
Right. Okay, one more team, Paris Saint-Germain. People don't realise they didn't exist till the 1970s, and
No.
they are a new club.
I went to Paris, my very first overseas trip on a plane with the school, 1964, I think, 3 or 4. And we wanted to go to watch football because of quite a few of us. We had a bit of time on a Saturday when we were there. We were there for 4 or 5 days. And we had to go to Saint-Ouen, I think. There was no PSG. There might have been a Red Star Paris or something. But we found this game, which was at second tier, maybe third tier, and we went. But I would say now, because I've been lucky enough to do some of their games in this run, and in the Champions League, and I've got the 2 games against Dortmund to come, so I'll have a better idea of. But they've got rid of their sort of Galactico thing. They're young, very hungry, produce players from within, bought sensibly from within France. And they've still got some core values. Marquinhos, I think, is an amazing story. He's 9 titles he's won, I think. He's now over, I think it might be, he's coming up 440th appearance. He's now of the club's history, the record appearance maker. And they still got 1 or 2 of the sort of lavishness about it. Donnarumma in goal is
An
a
accident
big buy.
waiting to happen.
Well, I didn't say that, but I say he's obviously from that sort of big spending type thing, coming in very young actually.
Although they got another free out of contract.
Oh, did they? Yeah. Well, I would imagine the wages would be reasonably good. That's an understatement, by the way. So I like what I'm seeing from them at the moment, and maybe it'll be the only time we can say that this young group have got Mbappe with them. We wait to see what happens over that. But he had a very quiet quarter-final, until when a penalty needed to be taken and another goal needed to be scored to wrap it up. Big moments, big names, great player.
Well, I'm going to go back with PSG. I'm not going to choose the current team because I like that midfield of Verratti, Thiago Motta, to bring this podcast full circle, and Blaise Matuidi, who I thought was an incredibly underrated player and an absolutely brilliant midfielder. I saw him 3 years running home and away when Chelsea got drawn against PSG home and away, and I thought he was so clever with his movement, and he used to make the same moves and they worked every time ahead of the ball. He was one of those midfielders who made runs from behind ahead of the ball, created space, got the ball in penalty areas. And I always think in the 2018 World Cup, he was the most underrated player in it because he and Kante allowed Pogba to be the Pogba that won the World Cup. And but Thiago Motta was a terrific player for them. And when he left, I always think they made a mistake, PSG, in not making Verratti the holding midfielder because I never thought he was as creative as all the Italians told me he was.
Lotta praise for Motta.
Oh, boom. So, listen, we've got no time this week for
You'll
Voice
be
of
relieved
Passion,
to know.
Voice of Reason, which is just as well because I was going to slag off referees and VAR again. I'll do it next week. And we're going to introduce something new called Stoppage Time for the end of it, which is a very quick one, but not today. So
it won't be a very quick one. It is following the guidance of FIFA. So we have to do at least 20 added minutes. Be warned.
From Martin and me,
Goodbye.
ta-ra. That's it. Hope you've subscribed. The Joy of Football, or in plural for the email, the Joys of Football podcast at gmail.com to contact us. Or, of course, you can go on the Patreon and just get involved. The Joy of Football.